Thank you. All right, then we will call to order the November 12th, 2020 meeting of the Abington Township Board of Commissioners Committee of the Whole. Our first agenda item this evening is a motion to approve the minutes from the inaugural Board of Commissioners meeting, Committee of the Whole meeting from October 8th, 2020, and I so move.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor and a second. Any comments or questions about the minutes from that meeting? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion's passed. Minutes are approved. Thank you. We have no formal presentations this evening, so we will move on to public comment, and this will be on the agenda items that are listed below. And as a reminder to those in attendance and those who will listen to this later, at the Committee of the Whole meeting, residents who wish are afforded up to 5 minutes to speak on the agenda items that appear before the Committee of the Whole. And so we will open that up for anyone who wishes to speak on the agenda items listed below. Okay, Nathan, we have one resident who would like to speak. Can you let her in?
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Lehman.
This is Laura Lehman, and I am, it's stunning. I don't know what residents have to do in order to get their voices heard. But clearly, you already heard me say that there is no way. Here's an article, or an item rather, about rental units. We have absolutely no idea what you intend. We have no idea what you intend to do or what your conversation about it is going to be. Maybe everybody doesn't like it. Maybe everybody's going to say, oh, no, that's not a good idea. We don't know. That's why the proper way to have public comment is to have the commissioners discuss an item and then for residents to comment on it cogently, what the commissioners are leaning towards. And this is done sheerly in a way to take our rights away, because our conversation beforehand is almost meaningless since we don't know what you're planning. And then you have the right to take an item and skip it across the committee meetings right to the board meeting where it's going to be voted on. And that was not our rights before. We had the right to have a committee meeting where every item, consent agendas weren't there. This Committee of the Whole wasn't there. And every item we had the ability to listen to the commissioners, hear what they were planning to do, and then make cogent comments. And then we had a week or longer to get together and let other people know what was happening and to research, do our research, and come to the meeting and speak again. That's the proper way to allow residents a voice in their community. And this,
I'm going to pause the clock for a second because I do want to respond to that, and then I'll let you return. But when the items appear here this evening, we will be making a determination about what needs to happen next. And regardless of that determination, it will be a full month before there is additional deliberation at any meeting, whether it's a committee meeting or if it were something that people felt that it was ready for the Board of Commissioners. So there would be a month for you to ask questions, to talk to other people. And at either the committee meeting or the Board of Commissioners meeting, you would have additional opportunity for public comment on the item. So I don't think we're taking away an opportunity. We're actually creating more time for additional discussion. And I will resume the clock.
That's not my understanding of this. My understanding of this is that you have the right to say this item needs no further discussion and to send it ahead for a vote. Did I misunderstand that?
The vote would take place a month from now at the Board of Commissioners meeting, at which there is public comment on all agenda items.
But
So-
you're saying the committee meeting where the item is first explained and then you get to speak.
You're getting 5 minutes here and you're spending it on process rather than content when we're explaining to you that we've added 5 minutes a month for discussion. So if you'd like to focus on the agenda items, that would be great.
You have not added 5 minutes a month. You have the ability to take our rights away Instead, all of the items should appear at a committee meeting where we can hear what you have to say first and comment on it cogently. For me to comment on it now, I have no idea what you're going to do with this. And so it literally is important for us to first hear your discussion. That's what I'm saying. I already explained that to you last time, and there's been no accommodation, even for the accommodation speaking away from the front of the meeting and allow us to speak after the item or at the end of the meeting. But you see, there's not even any speaking at the end of this meeting. So the first time that we might, if you decide to skip over the committee meetings with it, the first time that we might have to comment on it would be minutes before the vote. And that's not appropriate. That is absolutely not appropriate. So you are removing our rights with this. And when somebody asks you, can't we speak afterwards? What would be your reason not to allow somebody to speak maybe 2.5 minutes at the front and 2.5 minutes at the end, or speak on the item? Why would you not want to do that? Why are you afraid of public comment? This is not okay. We have a township manager who says he's old-fashioned and he won't put anything in writing. We don't deserve an old-fashioned township manager. We deserve to have the rights that help us with our government. And because you don't let people speak, they don't want to come to these long meetings. They don't want to come and listen 3 hours and then speak for 3 minutes and have you vote, 5 seconds later, all in favor, aye. And this is what we have in this township is 15 commissioners who are not caring that a consent agenda removes our rights, that the committee of the whole removes our rights, that this new public speaking policy.
Flayman, you have 30 seconds.
All of those things removed our rights. They didn't expand them. And I'm sad to see this happening in this township. Okay. And none of you spoke up at the last meeting for a township manager that did not keep his word and answer the questions that he said he would. So it's sad to see this happening. Thank you.
Is there any other comment from members of the public on agenda items this evening? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move into our formal agenda. And one thing I want to point out to my colleagues, you'll see tonight that 2 of the 3 agenda items are referenced with a commissioner's name next to that. And that's how we're going to do this moving forward. It may be that individual commissioners have put something forward, they've sponsored it, or it relates to an issue that they're working on. So you'll note that in the agenda item, and after I read the agenda item, I will turn to that commissioner first and then open it up for discussion among all of us. So with that, we will start with BOC-01-121020. And here we're going to discuss and consider creating a Martin Luther King Jr. Day special ad hoc committee. And for that, I'm going to turn to Ward 10 Commissioner Jessica Carswell.
Thank you, Commissioner Hecker. Colleagues, I wanted to bring this to our attention that on an annual basis for more than 2 decades, the township and the school district have collaborated on a Martin Luther King Day Jr. Special event. In years past, it has been held on the school's campus and has included presentations by a number of dignitaries and elected officials, as well as students from the various elementary schools. This year obviously presents quite a few challenges to the norm. But I don't want us to lose the opportunity to recognize this important leader in our country, as well as the many leaders who have followed in his footsteps to care about civil rights issues. And in our township in particular, we have a number of organizations and individuals who've done important work in that regard. So what I'd like to present to you is a creation of an ad hoc committee that would exist in the fall going into January, hosting an event, and then would sunshine shortly after, and would be an annual committee that we would stand up to plan this event. I am shared with a number of you that I'm hoping to have a minimum of 5 members on this committee, with representation from important groups, including the school district, our Board of Commissioners, the police, the Human Relations Commission, and that I also would really like to see this opened up to the public to invite a number of organizations as well as individuals to volunteer. I think that this event has had an important existence in our history, and I'd like to build on that by adding a component of service. I think this year presents a number of challenges, but there are opportunities to do socially distant service projects and community engagement that I think is important. So I'm hoping to have your support in creating an ad hoc committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Carswell. So I will open the floor for questions or comments. You can just speak up and I'll work to recognize you.
I would like to be a part
Commissioner
of
Vaughn.
I would like to be a part of this committee and to work with Commissioner Carswell regarding this. And I believe I have some partner organizations that would be able to work with this work on this with us as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Vaughn. Commissioner Carswell, how were we envisioning, membership? Is it just sort of first come, first serve? Or did you have specific thoughts about how to populate this ad hoc committee on an annual basis?
I'm going to defer to the township manager on some of the logistics of that.
Okay.
But what I had pictured was a minimum of 5 members, including a
5.
chair from the Board of Commissioners. And should everyone be open to it, I would like to chair that role.
Understood. Excellent. Manager Manfredi, do you want to weigh in or should I continue with commissioner comments?
I can address that and then you can continue if this helps.
Okay.
In speaking with Commissioner Carswell, she has framed out very well and she just outlined what she is thinking about. I think it would be very simple to create a scope and duties and a framework for an ad hoc committee and whether I want it to sunrise or sunset. And I think that the framework would be very simple. She's already done a lot of the work. And how we would populate that committee would depend upon really the further discussion. In some cases, the board in the past has allowed the committee chair to select, and we could certainly do that again. I think once I have a better idea of what the full board is thinking, it would be appropriate for me to meet with Commissioner Carswell if that's the direction you go, get her direction and frame something for when you do have a public discussion on the topic.
Given the time frame involved, since we're at the November meeting and Martin Luther King Day is mid-January, I guess we would have to work toward coming up with a general agreement this evening to move it forward for approval by the board in December, correct?
Yep.
That would be correct.
Okay. Commissioner Behe, I saw you had your hand up earlier.
Yes, thank you, Vice President Hecker. I think my comment was really towards what you were just referring to. That we need to move this along expeditiously. So I don't think this needs to be referred to committee for further consideration. It can be directed directly to the board next month for a final vote. But I think if all are in agreement that it does make sense that the committee get going, and then we can ratify that next month, if that's appropriate.
Okay. Yep.
Vice President Hecker.
Certainly.
I think it would be very easy. It would be very easy to put together that structure in a draft document to be circulated to everyone for their review. Of course, it would have to have, if everyone agrees, Commissioner Carswell to chair it, whatever it is that she would have to guide to make sure it meets what she's trying to accomplish. But that can certainly be put together and circulated well in advance for discussion, and of course would then be included. As you'll probably note, the agenda item is dated 12/10 with the anticipation that it would end up on that agenda, and that's how we track agenda items. So however it went, whether it was going to committee or not, it would end up on that agenda because time is of the essence. But we believe we can circulate that rather quickly.
Thank you. Commissioner Myers, I believe you had a question as well?
Actually, not a question, just a comment. I think this is a terrific idea. I am not volunteering to be on the committee, but nevertheless, a great idea. For many, many years, it was really only two people that put the program together. And it was always difficult because it started after the holidays. So thank you for thinking of this, Commissioner Carswell. I think it's terrific, and I fully support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. I won't make you volunteer, but I will ask you for advice for folks we should bring on board.
Commissioner Spiegelman.
Thank you, Vice President Hecker. I do want to volunteer if you could make use of them volunteer obviously for free. Any of my graphic design services that might come in handy for whatever you have planned. But I also want to echo the comments of Commissioner Myers and others. Thanking you, Commissioner Carswell, for your initiative and vision on this. I mean, there so obviously so many events, township events and events in our lives have just been straight up canceled because of this pandemic calamity. And for you to see the opportunity to not only save this important and inspiring event, but also reinvent it for our times is appreciated, and really excited to see what you and the committee come up with.
Vice
Thank
President
you.
Hecker.
Commissioner Bowe, please.
Hi. I echo everybody's thanks to Commissioner Carswell. So thank you very much for bringing this to us tonight. I think given the compressed time frame and some of the suggestions that have been made earlier, I was hoping that we could pause for a minute and talk about, because this isn't something that we, at least so far, we agree that doesn't need to go to a committee and would move for a formal vote in December. But if we are to get working on this right away, I think it would make sense to have a brief discussion about any, if any, budget implications of doing something like this on the township. What would be required? Is this, putting it together with good old fashioned volunteer labor, or are there budget implications? And just a pause and have a discussion about that, so we don't sort of forget to be intentional about that. Is that?
I'm happy to answer some questions on that. So I have spoken to Commissioner Luker, who used to be heavily involved in this, in the planning of this, and I have also just mapped out what I anticipate in terms of the work for this committee. I do not anticipate any budget, any actual expenses. There will be time for staff members to be involved, including the hosting of a Zoom, producing communications that go out on the web and on social media. But I do not see any cost to this event. When it comes to adding in the service component, I'm actually hoping that we can encourage various stakeholders around our community, whether they're nonprofits or elected officials, to host service projects. So if let's say a church is hosting a service project, they provide the supplies. We're just the conduit for bringing volunteers to that team. And same with, a park cleanup or any other thing. So I'm hoping to have zero cost.
Awesome. Thanks for all the thought you put into this. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you both. Commissioner Thompson, you had your hand up earlier.
I did. Thank you, Commissioner Hecker. I just wanted to echo the sentiments of everyone else here. I applaud Commissioner Carswell for picking up the torch and running with this. I think it's a worthy initiative, and I'm really happy that she's moving forward with it. And I fully support moving this ahead to the board meeting next month, and hope that she has the time to pull this together so we can move it through expeditiously. Thank you to Commissioner Carswell.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Are there other comments or questions from members of the board?
Commissioner, this is Drew.
Yes, Commissioner Rothman.
Jess is awesome for doing this and the perfect person to spearhead it. And I hope that those of us that have time to help will do so, because I think there's really good things that we can do even during COVID times. So thanks, Jess, and thanks everybody that's going to be involved.
Thank you, Commissioner Rothman. Other comments or questions? I have one final one, and this is for Manager Manfredi. if we move this forward, does the motion that we ultimately approve should that include designating who the chairperson is for that year?
I think if you are going to do that, if you're going to pass a motion approving and authorizing an ad hoc committee to be created for the purpose of the Martin Luther King special event to be chaired by Commissioner Carswell with appointments to be made by the chair and for the formal scope and duties of the committee to be on the agenda for the 12th to be approved, I think that would be in order.
Okay. And then in each subsequent year, we could reaffirm that, at some point in the fall at a designated time that would give sufficient time for the committee to get up and running and plan for the event in January.
So if you wanted to build into this that it's revisited, or you could just simply appoint the chair. If that chair does not want to continue, that person can step down and you can appoint a chair at a future date. It could be.
I don't want to bind
fairly,
Commissioner Carswell for life to this if she doesn't want to be so bound.
we could simply say that a chair appointment is on a annual basis. This way, if she wants to be reappointed, she can be, or if she wants to step away, she can. It's really up to the design of what she had in mind in the creation of the committee. I would frame this around her ideas and comment to the board.
Yeah. So Commissioner Carswell, do you want to speak to that?
So I think that what would be most helpful is in two pieces. One, what we put together for everyone to vote on in December, that we spell out some of these details. But then the second piece is once we've lived through this first ad hoc committee and the event, that there's a bit of a summary afterwards and we can kind of identify key pieces of the timeline. So obviously this feels, for me, a very short timeline for putting together an event. But who knows? We'll find out that it was the perfect timing, or maybe we'll decide that it should definitely be before the committee of the whole in September or October in the 2021.
Yep, I think that makes sense. And I would imagine there's also nothing stopping some planning activity getting underway in anticipation of approval next month, because I don't hear any resistance to this whatsoever.
I agree with you on that. And I would add that my hope is to coordinate, my plan is to coordinate public opportunities for people to participate. There are members of the committee who will be doing the heavy lifting and planning, but I want every meeting to be open for folks to participate and sign up to volunteer and help out. I think my whole thought in bringing this committee together was that this moment matters, and participation from so many people throughout our community matters. And those two had to be in sync with each other.
Yes, thank you. Any additional comments or questions? Okay, hearing none. So what I'm going to do then is make a motion that we move this agenda item forward for consideration and approval at the December 2020 board meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, terrific. Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Carswell, for bringing this forward. I think this kind of discussion is emblematic, I think, of what we envisioned here at the Committee of the Whole. And so I appreciate you taking the initiative to kickstart us this evening. So we're going to move to our second item, and I'm going to ask if it's okay, so that I don't miss anybody, because colleagues have been kind enough to text me to let me know that I didn't see that somebody was raising their hand. If we could try to use the raise hand function under the participants list, I'll be sure not to miss any. I don't want to miss anybody for discussion of the remaining agenda items. And so we are now at BOC-02-121020. And here we're going to discuss and consider creating a rental ordinance regulating rentals within the township. And for this, I'm going to turn to Ward 6 Commissioner Mike Thompson.
Thank you, Commissioner Hecker. Fellow commissioners, I had an instance in my ward not too long ago where I was I was contacted by a tenant of a property on the edge of the ward. She asked me to come over and take a look at some issues with her rental. And when I got there and I took a look at the rental, I was, quite frankly, stunned. Upon entering the porch of the rental unit, it was a single-family home. Water damage was visible and it was clear, as was some early mold growth. Walking down into the basement was probably the most egregious find that I had on that particular site visit. As I looked at the furnace, the exhaust line that connected the furnace to the outside of the building had a 6-inch gash in it, which meant that all the carbon monoxide that was coming out of that furnace and was supposed to be ventilating to the exterior of the building was actually dumping into the basement, which is a very clear life safety issue. Further walking through the house, I got to an illegal addition on the back side of the home. The roof on the addition wasn't planned well, which forced the door on the back of the dwelling to be 6 feet tall, which is 8 inches below the code required minimum, meaning that the second means of egress out the back of the home wasn't to code. And then looking at that illegal addition on the outside, I was able to move the block foundation walls with my shoe because there was no mortar in any of the joints, and clearly the addition wasn't structurally sound. Living in the house at the time was a pair of grad students, their 4 children and their 5th one on the way, and I found it very disturbing that a family of that size and of that intention was living in a home that had such an egregious life safety hazard within it. I mean, that carbon monoxide could have killed them overnight. Mm-hmm. And it was a wake-up call that we really need to do something to protect the residents that we have in this township that rent rather than own. So what I'm asking for here tonight is to establish a system that basically grants licenses to landlords within the township. And contingent upon receiving that license, a landlord would need to have their units, their individual resident units, inspected. And that inspection would have to verify via a third-party inspector that those units are warm, safe, and dry for the tenants to occupy. These would need to be done on some kind of a regular interval, looking at similar ordinances in either Conshohocken or in Warminster. Those intervals are set at annual or biannual intervals, but I suspect that really, in our community, we could probably just have this inspection upon tenant turnover. So what I am seeking is to just move this forward to the Land Use Committee next month and further define what this ordinance might look like. But I am hoping to hear back from some of you tonight and consider what this ordinance might look like, and hopefully we can move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. So I will open it up for consideration, and I see Commissioner Carswell has her hand raised, and then Commissioner Spiegelman.
Thank you. I'm super appreciative of the thoughtfulness behind this. Commissioner Thompson is not alone in his ward in having units that should be in better shape, and landlords that should be paying a little bit more attention to the spaces that they're providing to their tenants. I was in one of the apartment buildings in Commissioner Thompson's ward when I was delivering Meals on Wheels a couple months ago. And it was heartbreaking to see that someone was living in such destitute, so close to my own home and my own experience. So I'm really appreciative of the work that he's trying to move forward with this. I think this is a really important project for us.
Thank you, Commissioner Carswell. Commissioner Spiegelman, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vice President Hecker. I also want to say thanks to Commissioner Thompson. I think this, I definitely look forward to a real drill down discussion in the Land Use Committee. I think this really has the potential to be an innovation in resident protection. I do have just a really technical question, Commissioner Thompson. Just so we know how much sort of history local history we might be able to how much local history might be able to enhance our decision making. How long have I think you said it was Aconchi and Warminster had their ordinances? if you happen to know.
I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe Solicitor Clark has an answer to that.
Conshohocken has been since 2013. And I believe that I believe the other one you mentioned, Commissioner Thompson, was Lower Marion.
Oh,
or,
okay.
Or was it Warminster? I'm sorry. And I don't know when the other ones were in effect, but Conshohocken, which is the one I have in front of me, is from 2013.
Oh, great. That's really, I think we can really with that information. And thank you again, Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Commissioner Spiegelman. Commissioner Myers?
I'm particularly interested in this. My concern is that what you're speaking of are property maintenance issues and code enforcement. And I think that these exist not only in rental properties, but in home-owned properties. I also see the potential for abuse with this. And if for some reason that a tenant is unhappy with their landlord, then a phone call could be made justifiably or unjustifiably. I would be very interested to see the ordinance before a meeting where we voted on it.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. And I think that Commissioner Thompson wants to speak. I think that is the intent, and he mentioned earlier, and I'll let him expound on it, that he'd like this to go to committee for additional discussion before it would come forward to the board for any formal vote. Commissioner Thompson, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, absolutely. The intent really is to start putting together some language in the next month and bring it to the committee for further vetting. And Commissioner Myers, you raise a great point. Unfortunately, I have another incident that's sort of what you're bringing up here in my ward, where I have a tenant that is very upset at the landlord, and the tenant is literally cutting apart the walls and putting some, we'll call it biohazardous waste in the walls. And while I'm aware of that situation is going on, I'm preferring that we have some measure in place to ensure that that situation is rectified before the next tenant moves in. So I do understand the concern about abuse, but I think I have a similar situation that's already occurring over here, and well noted. That's all I can say. It's noted, and we'll address it.
Thank you. Commissioner DiPlacido?
Thank you, Commissioner Hecker. Commissioner Thompson, I do like this idea. I just had a question, and I think I might have missed it. I wasn't sure. Are we going to, or whose responsibility is it for the actual inspection? Is this a third party, or are we leaving this up to our zoning, our code department?
That's a great question, Commissioner DiPlacido. It would be left to a third party inspection agency of the landlord's choosing.
Okay, and they're obviously would foot the bill for that as well, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Commissioner DiPlacido. Commissioner Schreiber?
Thank you. We already talked about this a little bit today, Mike, but I'm wondering, maybe this is actually more of a process type question. The actual language, if we have ideas of things like we had talked about earlier today, if there isn't a turnover, when would it, would we put like a 5-year and some kind of inspection has to happen? So those kinds of things, does that come up in between before we see it at the committee level, or are we to add those things at the committee?
We will take a shot at that in the draft language, but then we can certainly discuss it at committee level. And it is a good point. I think we may have some long-term tenants in the township that would be well suited to have some of that protection, even if it is, at the midpoint of their lease. So yeah, we'll work on trying to set a duration within the leases.
Okay, so if there's in between, if there's other thoughts, you would just rather us call you directly?
Absolutely. Yeah, or email.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Schreiber. And Commissioner Thompson, I suppose one avenue that we could take to ensure that this gets, the full vetting, that everybody's comfortable, is to remand this to the Land Use Committee but then to have it come back to the committee of the whole for additional discussion before we take it to the board for a final vote. It would add, more time, but it may create additional opportunity to get right, the answers to all the questions that are being raised here.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Agree.
thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Vaughn.
I really like this idea. I am wondering, you mentioned that it would be up to the third party person would be up to their landlord's discretion. I have some reservations about that because they could just certify that everything is okay if they have a relationship with them. I'm wondering if there is a way that we could provide or have a list of like authorized third party people for them to use possibly. And then for people who are already living in apartments that have issues, would they be able to have their apartments go through this inspection, even though they're already living in it with these issues? Or would it just be for people newly moving in?
That's a great question on the latter. I don't know that we had considered when it would actually take effect and how it would work retroactively, but that's something we can certainly talk about moving forward. Manager Manfredi, I'm going to turn over Commissioner Vaughn's first question to you. I know that as a township, we typically refer plan applicants to a third-party plans reviewer to take a look at the plans and make comment on them. I would imagine it's the similar process here, but maybe you can speak to that a little bit more.
Sure. When you're dealing with rental inspections, it's a little bit different than a third-party reviewer. We typically do not try to get into a situation where we give a list and anyone can choose from that list. We don't recommend from that. It's one of the things we would have to talk about, and Commissioner Thompson and I discussed this, and as he knows, both Solicitor Clark and I have some experience specifically with rental ordinances, and there are many details to work out. If there is a third party, do we engage the third party? For example, the third party that we have doing the reviews, we engage. We've moved away from, in the township, we've moved away from the list of people that people can go to, because we don't want to promote any three. There might be five unless you're vetting them. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of questions about what the inspections will entail, what will they actually be looking for. I think the approach he is taking, putting it into committee to vet the volume of issues that come out of any rental ordinance and how you want this to look, is the right way to do it. And I think that's something that will have to be discussed. I know that's not really a great answer to your question, but I think it's who is actually going to be performing the inspections will depend greatly on what is included in the inspection. It's probably the easiest way to say it. And leave it at that.
Manager Manfredi, you had your hand up. Did you have another comment you wanted to make?
No, I apologize. That was an accident.
That's okay. And I'll get to Commissioner Schreiber in a second. I understand that Commissioner Bowman would also like to make a comment.
Yeah, I share Mike's concern for anybody that's living in such a squalid condition. And generally, it sounds like a good idea. There is an implied warranty of habitability to any apartment that is rented in this Commonwealth. And obviously, most times the remedy is to go to the local district justice and tell them that, that's being violated. The devil will be in the details. So I guess we'll wait. And as John said, we'll drill down at committee, because, you're getting into a big area here. There's a lot of apartments out there. And if you're going to inspect every one of them, and then you're going to act as the governor of whether that apartment now is habitable or or whether it's living up to some, the free market does a lot of that already. So, yeah, I'll go in and certainly willing to examine it, but it's a big area. So,
Thank you, Commissioner Bowman. Commissioner Schreiber?
Yeah, just another quick point. This is for like single family homes that are either being rented as a home or as apartments. This is not for apartment houses. Am I correct in that? I just want to make sure I'm correct on that, and anybody who's listening in understands that.
Sorry, thank you. This would apply to both, Commissioner Shriver. We would have to have specific language in there to address both single-family residential dwellings, as well as multifamily residential developments that we have within the township. The way I believe that Conshohockins was broken down, multifamily units were required to actually be inspected annually, and single-family dwellings, I believe, were required to be inspected biannually. I don't believe we have to, again, reflect those same intervals, but I think that we should be taking an approach where we're really looking at both.
I guess I was under the impression that apartment houses, like larger apartment houses, already had some rules like these governing them. Maybe I'm incorrect about that, but
I believe they have some as far as having a fire marshal inspect sprinkler systems and maybe even fire alarm systems, but I don't know that they go beyond those. So something like this, we're really looking also at the infrastructure. We want to make sure that the electrical is up to code. We want to make sure that the heating systems aren't ventilating carbon monoxide into the units, and we want to make sure that we don't have water leakage or mold growth in these units as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Brodsky.
So here's an idea. Here's a suggestion. Why don't you lay out a statement of legislative intent and circulate that in a memo to the entire board, as well as the intended scope and definition of what this proposed ordinance is. That way that can address a lot of the questions that the other commissioners may have had there. So I think that that will be actually an appropriate thing to proceed before or concurrent with while you're doing this at committee.
Sure, we can put that out with the committee agenda next month.
No, put that out before the committee agenda. Put it out a statement of legislative intent so we have a chance to take a look at that ahead of time. What's your scope of coverage? And make sure you delineate the differences in properties intended to be covered and properties not intended to be covered. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you, Commissioner Brodsky.
Thank you, Commissioner Brodsky. Commissioner Vaughn?
Sorry. I just wanted to make a comment off of what Lori said. As someone who recently did rent an apartment, they are inspecting on what the apartment looks like and what damages can incur from the person renting it over the time period, not necessarily inspecting for inhabitability and issues that may fall as a issue on the landlord, if that makes sense.
Yep. Commissioner Thompson, any comments in response?
No, I agree with Commissioner Vaughn's comment there. As a standard, typically when a tenant is looking at a rental unit, they're inspecting for basic aesthetics and livability, not necessarily life safety. And that's what we're looking for here.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions from board members? All right, hearing none, what I think I've heard here tonight, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, is that so Commissioner Thompson has expressed interest in having this matter referred back to the Land Use Committee. And I think based on the amount of discussion here tonight and the important points that were raised, I think we would make the motion to remand it to committee with the idea that it would come back to the Committee of the Whole following the committee's discussion. And then the Committee of the Whole, after it's ready to come forward, would then make the determination about moving it forward to the board. Are people in general agreement with that? And if so, then I'll make a motion to that effect. Commissioner Thompson, you okay?
I agree.
Okay. Yep. All right. So the motion is to remand the potential rental ordinance to the Land Use Committee for its meeting in December, with the idea that it would come back to the Committee of the Whole following the committee's deliberation. So I will make a motion to remand it to the Land Use Committee, returning to the Committee of the Whole. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Hearing none, then we will proceed. Our final agenda item this evening is BOC-03-121020. And we're going to discuss and consider a resolution authorizing the township manager to enter into encroachment agreements. And although it doesn't say it, I'm going to ask Commissioner Thompson to make a few comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Hecker. This item came about as a result of the stormwater improvements that were recently made on Hamel and Monroe. In the course of those improvements, it was realized that there are township dedicated plots that exist over some of the stormwater management lines. These plots are generally undedicated, but they are from time to time utilized by the residents that are directly adjacent to them. And in this case, I believe when we were making the repairs, we had a resident that had concerns about their own fence. And when we started discussing repairs to their fence with them, this topic came up. So basically what we're seeking here is a resolution that would formally memorialize the terms and conditions by which the township allows an entity or an individual resident to enter upon township property and sets forth conditions that they must abide by. This resolution, when we craft it, will establish a boilerplate agreement that can be tailored to suit individual concerns while protecting the township's interest. And so basically what we're saying here is if an adjoining property owner wants to make use of township property that's directly adjacent to them and sitting over top of stormwater infrastructure, they may do that. They would likely have to maintain it, and we would have to set and establish conditions that protect the township. And Manager Manfredi, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, Commissioner, I think you said it all. The only thing I would add is that in the resolution, Solicitor Lauren Gallagher did a very good job of outlining the very specifics that if this is authorized in making it an administrative function, because it is generally an administrative function, it would set forth the parameters so that you all know if it is approved, if an encroachment agreement is approved, what the conditions of that, as he said, would be. So no, beyond that, I have nothing more to say. Thought you did well.
Great. Thank you, Manager Manfredi. And the intent with this item tonight is to, again, refer it to the Land Use Committee for further vetting next month.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Thompson and Manager Manfredi. Commissioner Brodsky?
No, I'm good. If my hand's still up, I withdraw my hand.
Okay. We'll work. Yeah. Well, I have to figure out how to, I don't know how to do that either. Commissioner Myers.
Am I misunderstanding? Has this resolution already been written?
Yes, the resolution I asked for to be prepared so you had something to look at so you could understand what this might be, what might it look like if before you considered it. That's all.
I'm sorry.
I asked for it to be written so you could look at it.
I can't scroll here with what I'm looking at. Is this in this packet?
Commissioner
It
Myers, you're, yes, there you go.
It's way down. Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there other comments or questions? And again, Commissioner Thompson, I'll ask, would the intent be after coming back from the Land Use Committee, would you want this to come back to the Committee of the Whole for further discussion before going to the board?
I am open. Whatever best suits the board at this point. I want to make sure that everybody's happy with this resolution. So if it means coming back to the Committee of the Whole, then I am more than happy to entertain that.
Okay. Are there thoughts about that from members of the board? I mean, I don't, Commissioner Myers.
I'm sorry. I don't really understand what this is for. And is this a small problem, a big problem? I'm getting concerned that we are legislating everything. Is this a once in a while problem? I haven't run into it personally. So what would be a prime example of this? Commissioner Thompson, can you just make a real prime example?
Yeah. This is a every once in a while problem that we have over in Ward 6. And frankly, it hasn't been a problem yet, but we do have a number of plots that, as I mentioned before, exist over stormwater management infrastructure. They're dedicated to the township. In one case, right around the corner from myself, actually, a resident has adopted the land and has done some spectacular landscaping with lots of landscape planters on that land. And should the township find the need to go into that land and maintain those pipes and dig them up, then those planters would be destroyed. And the goal here is to make sure that if a resident does choose to do that in the future, that we are not responsible for replacing any personal property that is applied to the township land. So we would not be responsible in the case of the resident that's built landscape planters and done a lot of landscaping on township land. We're basically saying we're not responsible for the property that you've applied to the township land.
Isn't that common sense?
You would think it is, but I think we need a level of protection just to make sure that that's the case.
Well, no, we don't have many left, but there are certain areas of the township that still have paper roads, and the residents adjoining the paper roads are required to maintain them, cut the grass, whatever. So they do begin to feel somewhat of an ownership, but I certainly think that if it's definitely public land, township land, that it's understood that if something has to be done to it, it has to be done to it.
Yep. Manager Manfredi, you wanted to weigh in?
I think it's a great question because I don't think we're trying to regulate what people can do on our property. We're trying to, Commissioner Thompson's idea, and I guess it's more born out of the circumstance he's talking about. We specifically went on to a project on Hamel. The property owners wanted to maintain the property. It's our property, but we simply can't allow them to encroach and put things, a wall or trees on our property. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we just have an agreement that says you can encroach on our property, but you're going to maintain this. It's not something that we are going to maintain. So it's not at our cost or at our expense. It's not something that we are going to go out and try to regulate and go out to those properties. You make a great example. You know, there's a paper street or there's an easement where somebody is, you know, just over time organically moved out and decided to put shrubs out there. It's not something that we're looking to regulate, but when people are making improvements onto our property, setting forth the kinds of conditions that says, if you want to do this, we're not going to accept responsibility. You're going to take care of it. That was the intent, I believe, with Mr. Thompson and his particular property owner. And in this particular case, you know, it's in a section where there are a lot of people who've put up fences on where we have our easements. So, for example, you know, we could talk to the property owner about, look, if you want to put up a fence here, we suggest that you make it a wide enough gate that if we have to enter upon it, we don't have to tear the fence down, since you're going to be the one who's spending the money. So it just provides a vehicle for us to work with the property owner to make sure that there's an agreement as to what is going to be happening on our property where we have the easement. Not necessarily trying to go out and say, hey, this is our property. You know, you have to get off if we don't want to have an agreement. I guess that's probably, I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but that's more what the intent is here.
Well, certainly in the case of a fence, that a permit would have to be applied for, and that should be handled at that point. The
permit would be denied because they wouldn't have the right to put it on our property.
Well, there goes the need for that legislation. I'm concerned that we're going in a direction of over legislating the township for 1 or 2, 3 incidences. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I see. So I'll get to you, Commissioner Rothman, in a second. Commissioner Schreiber.
Thank you. This might have, the last couple comments might change what I'm about to say, but I was going to say, talking about process, when you were saying about it coming back to the committee of the whole, I thought the whole purpose of things going to committee is for them to stay in committee then at that point and get argued out. So I guess I'm not quite understanding things coming back to the committee of the whole then. and not going unless there's some unusual situation. Um, I- s- uh, that they should be going onto the board at that point. I mean, I guess if something comes up at the committee that seems like it needs to go back, instead of doing it the other way around where we're asking on each agenda item, should it come back to the committee of the whole? It seems to me it goes, the process that has, we mapped it out was for it to go from the committee of the whole to a committee if that's where we deem it to go, and then going on to the regular board agenda once things are hashed out at committee level.
So I think we have the option. And I mean, I think you're right, Commissioner Schreiber. I don't think we want everything that appears here to go to committee and come back to committee of the whole and then to the board. I think there was some potential thought related to these two new pieces of legislation that they may need some time to percolate and make sure that there's ample time for consideration, review, public input, and whatnot. But I agree. This is not an attempt to set precedent here where every agenda item is going to go back and forth, because I don't think that's efficient either. And I'm going to ask Manager Manfredi if he would like to comment on that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Hecker. Yeah, the design was in the case of the rental ordinance, because of the scope and the complexity of it, and there's not a draft ordinance to look at. In that particular case, there's not a great deal for all of the members to consider. So I understand the logic and rationale about bringing it back to the committee of the whole, but I believe Commissioner Schreiber is also correct that in a matter like this, there is a draft in front of you. It is far less complex. You are able to talk about it. So if it went to the committee and the committee made a recommendation, and that's the beauty of this system, you still have at least one more opportunity for comment at the full board meeting, where you either voted up or down. So the short answer is no, not everything is, this wasn't designed for everything to come back to the committee of the whole. I think it depends on each member and the full board's comfort level with the matter that's before them. This is more of a vehicle by which, where we see two commissioners tonight putting forth ideas to initiate discussion on the topic. Yeah. So in this particular case, yeah, I could see what Commissioner Schreiber is saying. It would make sense for it to go into committee and then be either go out to committee and then to the full board, or if the committee doesn't feel it needs to be acted upon, to not act upon it. And then that would set up a whole new set of discussions.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner Manfredi. And Commissioner Schreiber, I just want to clarify as well. I wasn't advocating that it come back to the committee of the whole. I was trying to get clarification about Commissioner Thompson's thought about this relative to the other item, just so that we're clear about what the process steps are before we make a motion and move forward. And if there is sentiment that this needs work at the committee level, but once that happens, it'll be ready for prime time and vote, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I knew you weren't advocating one way or the other way. I did know that.
Thank you. Commissioner Rothman and then Commissioner Carswell.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Hecker. I agree certain things should come back, like what we were talking about with a bigger ordinance and all that kind of stuff. So I think we'll figure out this process, and I think it's well underway in accomplishing what it sets out to as a vehicle. As to this particular idea that Commissioner Thompson proposed, I understand the concept of overregulation, but from a legal perspective, I think having something like this is beneficial. When a bad scenario comes about and someone is not happy with whatever they may have done to the township property, or they may have quote unquote understood this way or that, I think us having something that aids our position and desire, regardless of an assumption by an individual resident, is advantageous to us. So while my prior experience in law does not involve this type of matter, the great guidance we get from our solicitors should really put us in good position. I think we had, I don't know what you would describe it as, a few months back, there was a resident in Commissioner Brodsky's ward, and we were discussing who was going to handle what. And I know it wasn't exactly who was going to maintain certain dynamics of a project or something that may or may not be done. I know it's different than this, but to me, the concept is the same. When something goes bad, it's going to go really bad, and it might only be one time or two, But since Commissioner Thompson has situations that have led him to have the foresight for this, I don't believe it's an example of over-regulating. I think it's just getting our ducks in a row. I support it. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to draw it out, but I think that we're on the right track here. And to the idea that we may be over-regulating, I understand where Commissioner Myers is coming from, but I think that we have a group of commissioners now that we're looking to the future. We're seeing things that are shaping our experience in our daily lives as commissioners, and speaking with and using the resources we have in the township, including the solicitor's office, to get in front of it. So I do applaud all dynamics of tonight's presentations from Commissioner Carswell on down to the doubling up of wonderful work by Commissioner Thompson. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Rothman. Commissioner Carswell.
There we go. I am curious about the number of areas around the township where this might apply. So, for example, there may be existing property, personal property that's been put on top of township land, like in the case of the planters in Commissioner Thompson's ward. But I'm curious about where else there are boundaries where this might be an issue. So, for example, there is a water treatment, it's more than a shed, little brick building over here on Old Welsh, and it has housing on all sides but the road. I wonder about how this might apply to land there or other places in the township. So I think it would be helpful as the committee takes on this issue and this, drafting of a sample agreement, that we also look at where in the township this might end up applying.
Yep, thank you. Manager Manfredi, do you want to comment on that?
A little bit to that, but more in general context. I wanted to add some context. So on the agenda, you did not see Commissioner Thompson's name next to this because this really wasn't an issue that he asked to be on the agenda. It is on the agenda. Now, granted, it was in his ward, it was his constituent that was affected by our project. What would happen, just for context, is really very simple. The property owner wanted to be able to improve and maintain shrubs and a wall in our easement. And I do not believe I have the authority to tell anyone they have the ability to go onto our property and improve it. And I wanted to make sure of that. So in contacting from the site, actually, Lauren Gallagher, who's the solicitor from Rudolph Clark, and asking her view, and we talked about it. Is there a simple type of memorandum, or is there something that can be done? And as you know, I don't ever like to exceed my authority. So we talked about it would make sense to just have this discussion, create a resolution where you're aware of what authority you're granting and when I would exercise that authority. I do not see this as something that we're going to go out and try to do. But if we do have circumstances and situations where someone wants to improve our right of way, it would have to be on a case-by-case basis. We would have to apply the standards that you're setting forth that I would have to apply. And that's really what it would come down to. It's more of granting the authority and how you would want it to be executed to me and become an administrative matter, rather than, and to Commissioner Myers' point, rather than creating a situation where we're going to go out and regulate that, regulate where people are doing this and try to be punitive. That's not the intent. I don't know if that helps at all, but that literally, again, it's not an initiative of Commissioner Thompson's. The work that we did at his, or looking at helping his resident, yes, but this was put on the agenda by myself and the solicitor for the reasons I just stated.
Thank you, Manager Manfredi. Commissioner Spiegelman.
Thank you very much, Vice President Hecker. This speaks to the comments, to Commissioner Myers' comment, and also overlaps somewhat with what Commissioner Rothman said, but so I'll try to be brief. I absolutely do understand Commissioner Myers' point regarding over-regulating. I mean, certainly there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things we could do. A lot of well-intentioned, seemingly great ideas that can turn out to be solutions looking for problems. I'm as sensitive to that as anyone. But I think that both in general and in this specific case, this is exactly what the committee of the whole is for, and why it's it really is such a great innovation, because it's the committee of talking about stuff before we talk about stuff, and I think that once this is drilled down upon in the land use committee, I think simultaneously it'll come up that a lot of us in the wards we represent have situations like this. Since having a conversation with Commissioner Thompson about this, I thought of two that I had sort of long forgotten because they were resolved years ago. But just thinking about all the paper streets here in Ward 11 and these little situations that we might not necessarily be so cognitive of, but they can pop up at any time. Or maybe we drill down on it and it does turn out to be something that's not necessary. But I really think that that's kind of why this committee works so well. I certainly support sending this to the land use committee for the more rigorous analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Spiegelman. Commissioner Boll?
Thank you, Vice President Hecker. At the risk of repeating what others have said, I do think it's important that I support this going to the land use committee, and I think it is important to measure the potential volume here, or the potential for this across the township, and for a very specific reason. One, I think it gives us, to Commissioner Myers' point, bouncing off of Commissioner Myers' point, it gives us a little bit more assurance that what we're doing has broader application, and it gives us data around that. It also gives us a sense of the potential volume here. I think what I'm sort of observing, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, I could be wrong here, but I'm sort of getting the impression that residents are taking risks and encroaching on township property, and they don't necessarily know or aren't thinking about some of the factors about what happens if the township needs to come in and fix the lines underneath that property. And now all of a sudden, if there's an encroachment agreement, I don't know if this brings this to the surface a little bit more, and all of a sudden there are going to be lots of requests for encroachment agreements because people are all of a sudden realizing that they can sort of expand where their backyard goes or how far it goes. And I just want to be mindful of the volume there. And then secondly, I think that we need to, in the land use committee, take a look at as I know we will, take further look at the resolution, because I'm not totally sure that it strikes the right balance between flexibility and specificity. To me, it feels still too open and doesn't have enough specifics in it. I do like that point 3 notes that there are no permanent structures placed on the township property. That's critically important, I think, of course. And but I think that it still feels a little open-ended to me, and I will also be really anxious to take a look at what a draft encroachment agreement could look like, because that'll obviously be critical to solidifying this. And as soon as we have that, I think that'll give us all a better sense of sort of what this looks like and what kind of protections are offered to the township. I take Commissioner Rothman's point to heart, which is it could be helpful to have this in place for protection of the township, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So I look forward to the work that the land use committee will do on this one.
Thank you, Commissioner Boll. Commissioner Brodsky?
So my question is, one, generally encroachment agreements are upon, and thank you, Vice President Hecker. Encroachment agreements are generally between property owners, and it's basically an intent to resolve property disputes itself. Is it the intent of this proposed encroachment agreement or ordinance to deal with this to just be limited to, in scope, encroachment between township and private property owners, or is it intended to be broadly enforced for the entire township between private property owners and also between the township and property owners? That's the first part of the question. And then there's a question of cost of defining the actual survey to get the nature of the property itself, to find out if there really is an encroachment. And then if that's the case, who's responsible for that cost?
Manager Manfredi, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. I think the point is, this is why this is here for discussion, so these points can be made. I think we know where our properties are. We know where our property lines are. I think if a property owner knows, in fact, if we have a survey and in a lot of these properties, we could very easily find out whether or not it is our property or not. The intent is not for us to expend money. The intent is for us to make sure that we're not spending money. The intent is to protect the taxpayer's interest in whatever use is happening on our property. So if there was a need for a survey and a property owner wanted to do something on our property, it would be at their expense, not our expense.
But that's not my question. My question is this an intended piece of legislation or ordinance that's limited in scope to just encroachment agreements between township and private property owners, or is it intended to apply to all property owners?
What do you mean?
My question stands. Is it?
This is only when a private property owner is encroaching on township property.
So it's limited.
This is not when two private property owners have a dispute over where the shed goes or something along those lines. This would not impact that at all.
Okay, that was my question. And if there is a dispute regarding the property line itself, who's going to pay for the cost of the survey?
Commissioner, I apologize. I'm not understanding. So if why would we pay for any survey? This is to grant a property owner who wants to put something on our property that we've identified as our property. I'm confused. Like, why would there be a survey? And the bottom line is my short answer is this. We're not, if this is something that's being asked of us, we would not incur any expense. Therefore, if a property owner wanted to encroach on our property and do something and it required a survey, they would have to have that survey done. But my point is, we would know it's our property. So I'm not sure why we would demand or require a survey.
Well, as you know, property disputes and those type of issues always come down to the actual physical, what's between two properties. And if there's a dispute, which there can be, then things change. It's my question. So I understand your position. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
If
I
I
just wanted
may,
to make sure I was answering your question.
if I may just jump in there too, Manager Manfredi and Commissioner Brodsky, the resolution is really just giving us an ability to put together a boilerplate agreement, and then the agreement will have to be hashed out between the township and the property owner on a case-by-case basis. So if there is a demand from the property owner for a survey to really establish where the property line is, then I would imagine we would negotiate that into the agreement and make sure that the property owner is bearing the cost of the survey at that time, or we deny the agreement altogether.
Thank you. Commissioner Weingrad and then Commissioner Bowman.
Thank you. I'm unfamiliar with these types of encroachment agreements, but one question is, we're not talking about any kind of consideration or money, anything like that between the township and the property owner?
No, sir. This literally is because I did not believe I had the authority to approve someone making improvements onto our property.
Right.
And I wanted the board to grant me that authority with conditions and establish what that criteria is.
Right. I mean, it sounds like there is a benefit to the
It's that
township.
simple.
It sounds like there is a benefit to the township for these types of things, so that the property owner becomes really responsible for maintaining the township property, cutting the grass, things like that, but that the township has the ability to come in and if they have to get to the storm lines, they have the ability to do so, right? I mean, that's
correct. That is correct.
There is a benefit. But the other thing is,
That's correct.
I think it should go on the committee. I believe that. But just one thing I was thinking about, because I don't know enough about the circumstances when this occurs. But for example, that if there's a township plot of land that's between two property owners, is it a rush between those two property owners to get one of these easement agreements together? Like, is there a competition for it? Again, I don't know enough about the circumstances about these, but it's just something to consider that's going through my head. when we look at it.
Well, there again, to Commissioner Thompson's point, this, you know, for lack of a better term, this would be a template. I mean, that's obviously something that we would have to assess if we're requested to do that or if somebody wants to do that.
Thank you.
Sounds like the resolution will need a dueling monuments clause, sponsored by Commissioner Weingrad. Commissioner Bowman.
Thank you, Vice President Hecker. I did share Commissioner Myers' concerns earlier, but Rich's explanation was very helpful. And it's only a resolution. Pardon my dog in the background. Yeah, it sounds like something that Rich could have at his disposal, like he said, to on these few occasions where it pops up. So, sounds like a good idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowman. Are there other comments or questions from members of the board? I don't see any additional hands raised, but if you have any, please feel free to speak up. Okay. Well, hearing none, then we are going to make a motion to remand this resolution authorizing the township manager to enter into encroachment agreements back to the Land Use Committee for further deliberation, with the idea that once the committee is done with it, it will move forward to the Board of Commissioners, the full board, for consideration and vote. I so move.
Second.
There's a motion and it's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. And that concludes our formal agenda for this evening. And before we adjourn, we'll just say, offer my thank you to my colleagues this evening. I think this is an example of the kind of spirited and deliberative dialogue that we can have on substantive issues as we decide how to move matters backward and forward with the overarching goal of improving the quality of life here in the township. And as always, as we mature this process and this meeting of the Committee of the Whole, any feedback that you have about how to make the meeting better or to make the process more efficient is certainly welcome. And please feel forward to share that with us at any time. With that, we are officially adjourned for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
All right, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good work, everybody. Look, that's easy. That is not
Love it.
Who cares about the clouds when we're together? Just sing a song and think about sunny weather.
time to make dinner. Good night, everybody.